This episode of Off the Cuff is brought to you by Weaver Simmons, and we're very pleased to bring it to you. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to episode 4 of Off the Cuff. I'm Matt Butler.
I'm Darren Chohan.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I forgot number one what episode we were on.
Yeah.
So I had to look that up. We're probably irrelevant and nobody's following us anymore.
Nope.
I think the subscribers went down.
Yeah.
And we got some hate mail.
That wasn't really nice, but yeah.
So didn't like that. Spurred us into coming back. So at least, we're here. We're present. We didn't die. In case any of you wondered what happened to us, we're still alive.
Yeah. Very much alive, as you can see.
Yeah. So we're back into filming. Hopefully this continues on. We've cleared our schedules and,
Just so everybody understands, we're taping this on a Friday night.
Yeah.
That's how much we care. It's Friday night.
We're very dedicated to the cause. There's a Wolves game going on right now. It could be at. Yeah. I could be in bed right now, actually.
Yeah.
I could be hanging out with my wife.
Sure. That's always fun.
Yeah. So we're here for you. So you're welcome.
You're welcome.
And we're back.
Big football weekend coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the divisional round is going to happen. And by the time this launches, it will have happened.
Hopefully the Cowboys beat the Niners.
Yeah, huge Cowboys fan. I don't know if you guys know. I bleed blue and white.
Yeah, okay.
True.
Yeah.
I have Cowboys socks, Cowboys sweaters, Cowboys swag.
I'm surprised you didn't wear your Cowboy socks
No,
today.
I got Penguins today, but
that's cool too.
Yeah, everyone likes Penguins. My daughter's obsessed with them, so I thought today, as an homage to the episode about family law, I thought I would do a tribute to my child. She's so sweet. She's at home, and I thought about the Penguins and the children. Because we think about the children.
We think about the children,
right?
Yeah.
We go right back to episode 1 when this all started. That's all we do.
That's all we care about, the children.
The kids. So, anyways, the Cowboys, huge fan, always have been. My dad goes back to the days of when they were like the Houston Oilers existed, and then they left, and then
Warren Moon,
yeah, back in those days, and then Canada guy, why do you like America's team? Weird. Everyone asks me that. It's so strange.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there's no NFL team in Canada.
I know. So what do you want me to do? Cheer for the Argonauts? Like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I know.
They're blue and white, but that sucks.
Big CFL guy.
Yeah, not a huge CFL guy. So Cowboys 49ers going to be a big game. I'm looking forward to Chiefs Jaguars. I think, apparently there's some bad weather coming in this weekend. So
we have some money in a couple of games. We're not going to tell you what because gambling's illegal between two people, so it's fine.
But now we're allowed to put gambling advertisements on our show. So
if you guys notice, so many gambling.
FanDuel. So, check it out. Maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know. Just play responsibly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a line somewhere you can call.
So you made a reference to we're on homage to family law.
Yes.
Because what are we discussing today?
Well, I thought that we should talk about the thing that is so taboo that we never talk about, and that's divorce. Because I looked back again when I was doing the review of all the things that we did and how long it's been since we've not done anything.
Yeah.
We not talked about divorce, and it seems like we're two family lawyers, and we kind of know about that stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why we hadn't talked about it yet. So I think today we're just going to go right into divorce.
Yeah.
What it is, what you do.
Yeah, and just give you sort of the ABCs of divorce.
Oh my God. Did you guys see what he did there? ABC divorce.
That's pretty good.
This is why it took him 4 months to come up with that, but we're here.
That's why we don't have an episode until now.
The content's hard to come up with, guys. So here, bear with us. But yeah, I think that's a great way to kick it off because with divorce comes lots of questions. Number one, there's lots of uncertainty. There's lots of emotions.
A lot of misconceptions too.
Oh yeah, lots of those misconceptions actually. And being a family law lawyer and getting the call from the guy that I haven't heard from in like 21 years saying, "Hey man, you're a lawyer. I'm getting divorced. Can you help me? What is my wife going to get 50% of everything I have?"
Yeah, that's the biggest thing we hear. What are my rights? Because people just don't know what happens when they get divorced, and then you get people who think they know because they know somebody who went through it, and they give you sort of erroneous advice. But we sort of give you the step-by-step, what can happen, what to look for, how to prepare yourself.
And it's not as scary as you may think.
No,
I mean, I don't want to downplay divorce because, I think it's what I would say is almost the worst time in everyone's life.
Yeah.
Like it's probably going to be the worst time in your life if you're going through that.
Yeah.
Especially if you have children and, our job we're actually here to not only assist you through the legal process, but I feel like a therapist sometimes. And we're not qualified to do that, but I think a lot of the times people really enjoy just hearing like it's going to be okay.
When you explain
it's
the process,
reassurance, right? And explaining the process, explaining it's not as bad as you think. Because again, those misconceptions, people are just, in their own heads, down the rabbit hole of the internet. First of all, that's because this wonderful thing we have called the internet, there's just information out there. And I found too, there's lots of like social media groups that are just set up to give bad information. And it's just, we combat that every day in our practice. It's the Google lawyer, right?
It's increasingly more difficult because there is a lot of good information out there as well.
But how do you know?
That can be mixed up in just wrong information a lot of the time. So let's take a break, and then we'll come back into what to do when you first get separated.
This episode of Off the Cuff is brought to you by Weaver Simmons, Northern Ontario's largest law firm.
Welcome back. So what we want to talk about first, and we had alluded to a bit before the break, was the misconceptions of divorce. Because, if I had a nickel for every time I heard I need a legal separation,
that's a big one. Or I get 50% of everything.
Yeah.
Or I have to give up 50% of everything.
Or I have to leave the house, right?
That's a big one too, yeah.
So we're going to go into a little bit about, why don't you talk a little bit about the I get 50% of everything? Yeah,
so that's something we hear almost with every file. I do have to give her or him 50% of everything I own. So that inherently is just not the case. There's a process called an equalization process, which we're going to explain later on. But that's just not something that if someone tells you like, oh, you got to give 50% of your pension, you got to give 50, that's not exactly the case. And that's something that if you get independent legal advice, first and foremost, that's something they're going to tell you, a lawyer's going to tell you right away. So don't go right ahead and go like, oh, I have to give 50% of everything. That's not the case.
Yeah, and that's something people should be aware of when you're even trying to negotiate these things out yourselves. You don't have to give 50% of everything. It's math. Really, family law, funny enough, I never thought I'd be doing math in my law practice, but math is a big element of what we do. We do calculations nonstop. And sometimes what you think might be having to give 50% of everything I own turns out to being a very small equalization payment because both parties are actually leaving the marriage very equal.
Exactly.
And that's, the name is equalization payment. What it means is to be equal at the end of the marriage. And so when we get into that, you'll understand what that means.
What's another common misconception?
So the legal separation thing gets me every time.
Yeah, you like that one.
And so I get a phone call and somebody will say, well, I need to get legally separated from my spouse. We're thinking about divorce and, our relationship is over and I need a legal separation. And I say, okay, why? What does that even mean? And
that doesn't mean anything.
That doesn't mean anything. So newsflash, legal separation, not a thing. Being separated is just a declaration that your relationship is over and you choose a date in which it's over. And again, we're going to get into what's called the date of separation or the valuation date. And that's the date you and your ex-partner choose to separate. So whether that be the day you decide that your relationship is over, the day somebody moves out of the matrimonial home, the day you put a piece of tape down the center of the house and you don't cross that center and that's what it is, you divide it up that way.
Do that.
And that little misconception also goes into you can live separated under one roof.
Exactly, right? Because some people think if I'm separated, I have to leave the home because that's what separated means. Again, the matrimonial home, if you two are married and you have a matrimonial home, another common misconception is you have to leave to be separated. You don't have to leave. You can actually be separated living under the same roof as long as you're living separate lives. So if you're eating together, sleeping in the same bedroom and doing everything together, that might be difficult. It may not be a separation. But if you're doing your own thing and you two are living separately, then you're separated. You don't have to leave the mat home, which is another matrimonial home, which is one of the most common misconceptions about
and I think
the separations.
there's lots of things that indicate that you're broken up, right? You split your finances, you stop, you close the joint bank accounts, you start paying for your own things, you put one half of each bill into one account. And, once you start doing all those things, you're legally separated, which is, you're just separated. That's really the word.
Yeah.
And then that's what you use going forward as your date of separation. So those are some of the big ones that that we come across almost, I would say, daily.
Yeah, pretty much daily.
Any new call that comes in for this, I hear one of these things almost in every new intake, right? We're always having to give that advice. And it's something that people should know about, because that stuff is what the internet will sometimes misguide you on. And so just be careful what you're reading, and always fact check your sources. If I'm meeting with people and they want to read up on the internet, I always say, go look at law firm blogs. You can, independently verify the sources. Those are the better places. I always tell people to avoid social media. For legal advice, and don't go ask your friend what happened in their divorce, because 99% of the time it's not going to be anywhere near what happens
subjective
in yours.
experience.
So subjective,
exactly.
And that's I think the biggest misconception of divorce is that it is so subjective. It is so fact specific. It is so case specific, and no single divorce is the same. Like, I can probably confidently say that.
That's a pretty good statement. I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So you've heard the misconceptions, and we alluded that we're going to talk about the date of separation, which becomes a very important thing. So why don't we go into that?
So establishing a date of separation is actually quite important for the equalization process. Let me explain. So the date of separation is what we call then the valuation date. So that means your property, whether it be vehicles, furniture, bank accounts, pensions, we're looking at the value on that date. If you're separated January 20th, 2023, then the value of the property that we're going to take for equalization is from that date.
It's like it freezes. It's frozen in time.
Exactly. So when it comes to pensions, that's one of the main assets that we deal with. You have to get that valued. You have to do like a family law value that's going to essentially give you the value from the date of marriage to the date of separation. So the valuation date. Then you call your bank, get your documents together on that specific date. What was my balance on these accounts? Get that documentation. It's going to be incredibly important, because we're going to take those valuation date numbers to get essentially to what we call your net family property, which in a simpler term is basically like your marital net worth.
Yep.
From the date of marriage to the date of separation, what was your increase of net worth is your net family property.
Right, and that's an important point, because, again, this goes back to the misconception of I have to give 50% of everything. Because if you're a pension employee, the only equalization of your pension that you have to do is the accrual during the marriage.
Exactly.
Right? So you don't have to equalize your pension from the date of inception. It's if you worked 10 years before you got married at the same place, and then you continued working there for another 20 years, well, the later 20 years after you got married is equalization worthy. The first 10 years is protected.
Exactly.
And so it's important that you know that, and it's important. That's why there's the family law evaluation process for pension specifically. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is that when you're thinking about divorce, and when, if you've separated, getting your financial statements, your bank statements, your investments, and everything in order is very important, because we need that information as lawyers to help you calculate what you're worth at the end of the marriage. And you also need to be upfront and transparent, which is another thing we see a lot of, is people are trying to hide money, or what if I put this snow machine in my mom's name post separation, and what, or if I just get rid of all this property post separation. But what you need to know is that it's frozen in time. So even if you dispose of something after separation, you're still stuck with the value. And if you sell it for less, or you hide it, or whatever you do, you better be ready to pay on that value that's attributed to it on the date of separation, not when you disposed of it. And so that's
Exactly.
a very important thing. A lot of people do that. Like a lot of people try to just
They try
get
to
away with it.
Yeah, and the biggest thing sometimes we see is someone just emptying a bank account, and they think like, oh, the bank account's
Like
empty.
the joint account.
Exactly, the joint account. Just all of a sudden, there's no money in the joint account.
Yeah.
It's going to be crystallized in time. Now, one question I get asked, and I'll ask you, is the date of marriage important in this analysis?
Yeah, the date of marriage itself comes into play again when you're doing equal valuations on the pension. But sometimes, if you've dated for a very long time prior to marriage and cohabited for a long time, and then you get married, but during that period of cohabitation, your pension is accruing, there is the legislation does allow for you to equalize or receive equalization on the period of cohabitation as well. So that is oftentimes one of the most negotiated pieces. Parties will have to come to an agreement whether or not they're going to use date of marriage or date of cohabitation, because if that's a significant amount of time, I mean, my wife and I were together 10 years before we got married. So that could,
a good chunk of time.
that's a good chunk of time that pension could accrue. So those conversations have to be had. So I think in the context, date of marriage is important. One of the most sought after documents in a divorce is the marriage certificate. People can never find it.
They can never find it. It's ridiculous how many times we have to go chasing for it. Just another thing on the date of marriage. The other thing that's incredibly important is like the assets that you come into, or basically we'll say, again, I hate using the net worth, but your worth at the time of the marriage can actually be deducted from your net family
That's
property.
a really good point, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So if you owned, we'll say you owned investments of like $50,000 and at the date of marriage, then for your net family property, that could be a deduction because things you come into the marriage with are deducted off your net family property. So the date of marriage, if you can get your documentation together from the date of marriage,
Huge.
It could be huge because the long marriages of 30, 40 years, we typically don't have date of marriage documentation, so we don't have those
shorter term marriages.
Shorter term marriage. If you're married in 2008, you can go back and get statements. You can go back and see what kind of property you own then.
And another important thing about that is that if you come into the marriage with debt, and then that debt gets paid off during the marriage, it's actually added in to your net worth.
Yeah, exactly.
As at the end of the separation or in the net family property calculation, because you came into the marriage with a negative net worth. You and your spouse paid that debt off.
Exactly.
And now your spouse is entitled to a credit for the debt that was paid off during the marriage.
Because you've essentially used
student loans is the big
loan. The OSAP loan, student loans is the big one because essentially you've used family property during the marriage to pay off a debt of yours. So you shouldn't, like, your spouse shouldn't, be discredited from that. That's why they're credited with it. So that's those are important. The two most important dates are that the date of marriage, obviously, and then the date of separation for value purposes, which is excellent.
So at this point now, we hope that you're in the process of gathering your financial documentation. Maybe you've called a lawyer now. Maybe you haven't called one yet. But the next question you're going to get when you do call a lawyer, or at least the first question or first series of questions is, I'm going to need you to prepare a financial statement. I'm going to need all your documents. So we would encourage you, if you're going through this process, the more paperwork you have ready for your first initial meetings and for your discussions with counsel, are going to save you money, because the less work we have to do via investigation on your finances, the more money you'll save and the more accurate we can be in our assessment of your financial picture. So you've called us. You're separated, not legally, but just separated. And what do we do next? We have the Mat Home.
So the Mat Home's is always the bigger one. And that's the thing we want to sort of get ahead of first and foremost. Obviously, if you have children, which we're going to get to, that becomes the most important thing. But the main asset oftentimes is the matrimonial home. Another common misconception is, well, I get 50% of the matrimonial home, right?
Right, yeah.
Is that accurate?
No.
No, because someone could have actually owned the matrimonial home fully during the marriage. However, in the equalization process, you do share in the sort of the value of the home just through the equalization process.
And it matters. And just for you guys, matrimonial home just means the home you lived in as a married couple. It's just a fancy term to say it's the family home. But the value becomes a big point of contention because you have usually one person wants to stay and keep it. One person ends up leaving just because the reality is people don't want to live under the same roof. But what Matt said earlier, joint ownership versus one person just owning it outright, is that depends on what value is attributed to the matrimonial home. So the law says that if you're jointly owning this piece of property, you get the fair market value of this matrimonial home on the date of disposition, meaning if whatever date the transfer occurs from one spouse to the other, or if you end up agreeing to sell it, it's the value of the home on the sale or the disposition date. But if one party owns it, then the value that's attributed to that is actually frozen at the date of separation, which is unique and not a lot of people know that.
Yeah, it becomes complicated because people think automatically, well, I can just buy them out. That's actually not the case because you are entitled to the fair market value of the home. So if you think the home is worth $300,000, the only way we actually get to determine what the actual value is to list it for sale and sell it. And
usually you get appraisers involved.
Yeah.
We stay away from realtors. Another common question we get is, can I just use a realtor to tell me the value? Well, no, because a realtor just wants to sell your house.
Yeah.
And you can't bring a realtor to court. Like, I would never call a realtor to testify in a family law trial about a value of a house.
Well,
judges would just look at that and throw that evidence out because
exactly.
You need an appraiser, a formal appraisal, formal report. They're treated as experts. They give expert opinion on that, and that's their role at the trial. But what you have to do is really consider what, who wants to buy who out, if that's even an option, and then agreeing on a value. And then another little tidbit is that if you both can't agree and then somebody has to go to court to get this property sold, you as the outside spouse looking to buy this place off the person who's selling it doesn't get the right of first purchase.
No, that's
you become an equal bidder in the process of selling this house.
That's another common misconception where I just get right of first refusal. There's actually case law of the Ontario Court of Appeal that does not give you that right. Just because you're a joint tenant, right, and you co-own a home together. No,
so I think those are the biggies on the matrimonial home. You'll sometimes hear about like, well, does my partner have to pay rent for living there? I'm paying all the bills. There is something called occupational rent. I'm not going to get into that really. That's complicated in a trial issue. We don't really deal with that.
There's exceptions to everything we're saying right now. So that's the disclaimer. Like, there are exceptions to every rule.
Yeah, so I think we've been talking for a while. We'll take a break and we'll get into my favorite part, the kids.
And we're back. One of the most contentious issues, I would say, in 95% of the files we have, is the parenting aspect of a file. Yeah. Now, the old terms was custody and access. Now we use decision-making, responsibility, and parenting time, and then where the children are going to live. Oftentimes, that is the issue that halts resolution. It's the issue that people will argue about the most. And it's one thing that we like to tell clients: I don't know your children. A judge doesn't know your children. You guys know your children. It's so much better if parents figure it out. And there are resources to help them with that.
Yeah, there's parenting plans. The government makes those available.
There's parenting coordinators.
There's parenting courses.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff to help people through separation and dealing with kids. And oftentimes it's one of the more sad things we see because there's so much, the last thing what we want to do as lawyers is be put into the position where we're being asked or told by our client that they want us to leverage parenting time for gain in the financial aspect of the file. Like, we often see it with high income earners trying to leverage parenting time versus spousal support obligations, and because there's formulas for all that stuff, and we're not going to get into spousal support today because it's the Wild West.
It really is, yeah.
There are calculations and formulas that I don't even understand. We just put it into the calculator, and it tells us. But people try to use their kids as leverage to pay less or more support or get more or less support. On top of that, they use the kids as leverage to get the child tax benefit and all the government subsidies, subsidized daycare.
Yeah.
There's so many things that people use their children for that is just what I would say inappropriate in these separated environments. And what I think gets lost is nobody cares about the parents' feelings. Like when you're in litigation, the judges don't care how you feel as mom or how you feel as dad. They're really just looking at what's best for these children, however many there are, and how do we make their lives better as a result of the separation.
Yeah, and we're trying to keep them as normal as possible. And that's we've said this in, I think, our first ever episode, the relocation episode. The only thing the court cares about when it comes to decision-making responsibility, parenting time, and the primary residence of the child or children is their best interest. That's the only thing they care about.
Like full stop almost.
Full stop. And like, if you're divorced, you're dealing with the piece of legislation, which is the Divorce Act. It's a federal piece of legislation. And there's a specific tests and criteria that the court will identify and look at in making its determination for decision making, making its determination for parenting time.
Yep.
And another saying common misconception is like, oh, I'm entitled to 50%. You're going, well, in a perfect world, if everything was perfect, you would share 50% of the time. But if it's not in the children's best interest, the court won't award that.
No, and you often see people come in here and you talk to clients about it all the time, about that misconception. It's like, well, I'm one half parent. I am entitled to one half of the care and control of the children. And you say, well, maybe we have to, rewind a little bit and find out what was happening before you separated, right? Because if one party was doing all of the things for the children, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, school, bake sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If one party was taking care of all of that, and then the other party was going to work and coming home and really not involved with the kids, well,
or just less involved,
then maybe a 50% week about is not in the best interest of the kid,
because it's not been the historical plan.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not how the relationship was happening prior to separation.
Yeah, exactly.
So why would it all of a sudden post-separation be that way?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we look at it and on a global basis. Now there's way more things that we have to
there's tons
at,
of other criteria.
That's like, I would say, the baseline of talking about, whether or not it's equal parenting time, whether or not it's joint decision-making. And I'll tell you, what I've been seeing more and more and advising clients more and more now lately is that joint decision-making should almost be agreed upon, because there aren't very many decisions under that joint decision-making umbrella that need to be made for the kids.
Right.
And you may as well agree to joint decision-making. Sole custody is a thing of the past, in my opinion. And then work within those confines of, okay, let's have a framework for what happens if we disagree, rather than one parent making all the decisions, unless it's appropriate in the circumstances.
Exactly.
And we talk about that. But I think I'm more apt to recommend joint decision-making before I'll recommend equal parenting time.
I couldn't agree more. The joint decision-making with a framework of disagreements, I think is a great baseline, with exceptions, of course. Because also with decision-making, primary residence, and parenting time, the next obvious question is child support.
Yep.
Right?
And that's the big, and child support, for whatever reason, it leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. And, how many times have you heard, well, I don't want to pay that to my ex-spouse?
Or I think that's too much.
Yeah.
I hear that almost every day.
So what tell us what's the deal with child support?
So child support is obviously there are exceptions, but we look at your income. There are table amounts. It's the federal child support guidelines. And in accordance with your income, that's your line 150 income. We look at your income tax. There's exceptions, but in the most normal of cases, we look at your line 150 income from your T1 income tax returns. We then look at the guidelines. And then let's say you have one child and you make a certain income, there's a specific number for child support that you have to pay. There are exceptions, but if you don't fit within those exceptions, you are required to pay that. If you refuse to do so, you will be forced to do it eventually.
And there are exceptions, but if you're litigating and you're in court and trying to not pay your child support, the table amount, and it actually looks like a table, and you can point your finger to the number, a judge will order child support to be payable. There are very, very rare circumstances where you would pay less than the table amount that's listed. Or, again, conversely, you pay more. You're not going to pay more. But that amount is almost like one of those things in our world that I consider to be just black and white.
Oh, no, exactly.
That
100%.
table amount is what you pay. I don't care what you have to say about it. I don't care who you want to pay it to. You cannot pay it to your young children. It goes to the other spouse. And, you have to hope they use it to support them, because there's no control over what happens to that money after it goes into the hands of the ex-spouse. But child support is the right of the child.
Yeah.
It's not the right of the ex-spouse.
And the theory was that per your income, what percentage of it would you be using per month in the family nucleus, in the family, in sort of those dynamics on the child or children. So that's where the theory of child support comes. Is it perfect? I don't think anything we're discussing is perfect, but it's to ensure the children have what they need, have the tools to live.
It's to prevent child poverty, really.
That's a great way of putting
it.
Yeah.
They've determined this number as a basic needs level.
Yeah.
Based on what your income is.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's to prevent child poverty. Like, you don't want to see your children in that situation, so pay the child support.
Right.
Those are the conversations I have with my clients all the time. And it's I'm sorry, I'm not going to pursue a crusade of you not paying child support just because you don't feel like it.
So that's in situations where there's not an equal shared parenting arrangement. Now, if there is let's say 50-50 arrangement, or you're over the 40% threshold, because that's the threshold. As long as you have parenting time 40% of the time, your child support is now on a set-off.
Right.
So explain that a bit.
The misconception with the set-off is that because we're sharing the kids equally, no support should be paid.
Yeah, we see that often.
That's so now that's the thing we combat with equal parenting time. And actually, equal parenting time, which means 40% of the year or more, is a set-off amount between both incomes. So we actually would calculate what the one spouse would pay the other on their income for the child or children. Then we look at the other spouse and we calculate what they would pay the first spouse for the same amount of children on their income. And then the difference is payable to the lower income earner. So if one party owes $600 in child support on an equal basis and one party owes $400, the net payment is $200 to the other party to equalize the households.
Yep.
And that's called set-off.
And that's just called the set-off, right. And then along with child support, there are what a lot of people will just mention as Section 7 expenses. So it's Section 7 of the Federal Child Support Guidelines. But what's actually... What are those expenses? Are special and extraordinary expenses, and those are shared on a pro rata basis. Right. And there's a specific list within the section that we've explained. But things like daycare expenses, dental expenses beyond insurance, those are shared on a pro rata basis, and that's beyond the child support. You can say, well, the child support should pay for that. Well, there's certain things that go beyond the child support.
What about extracurriculars?
Well, extracurriculars can be, that it depends. Right, if your children are into, we'll say, competitive sports, that can be considered a special and extraordinary expense. But just buying skis because they like to go skiing, that may not fall under Section 7 expenses, right? So the actual expense and the purpose of the expense becomes important in that determination.
Now, why don't we talk a little bit about equalization, because we spent some time
Yeah, we explained it a bit.
explaining it. And now I think it behooves us, your favorite word,
It does behoove us.
to give an explanation of what equalization actually means. And, the rudimentary sense, we're not going to get into heavy details, but like what is it?
So again, like in a very general sense, we're looking to equalize the net family property. We're looking to equalize the marital assets and sort of the marital increase of value. So if we look at someone's net family property value, let's say spouse A is $300,000. Basically, their marital net worth is $300,000, and we look at the other spouse B is $100,000. So if we have someone who's worth $300,000, someone who's worth $100,000, there's a $200,000 difference there. The equalization payment is 50% of the difference. So in this situation, the difference being $200,000, 50% of that is $100,000. That's what your equalization payment would be, is $100,000 to your spouse.
And this is a perfect way to show you that it's not half of everything you own, because the $300,000 spouse, one half of that is $150,000. Well, look, in the equalization payment, that spouse is only giving $100,000,
Exactly.
not half of what they own.
Yeah, so that deals with that misconception, right? But if you're looking at it, you're going, well, that person's going to be worth $200,000, and I'm going to be worth $200,000. So you're going, that's what the equalization is doing. Married spouses without a marriage contract or a prenup, getting themselves out of this sort of equalization process, have to go through this process. You agree not to do it, but if a spouse wants the equalization payment, they're entitled to it.
Mm-hmm. And one interesting thing about equalization is that it's not necessarily the person paying's choice on how to pay that equalization payment.
Very true.
Because there is case law out there that says you must, lose liquid funds first until you then whittle it down to retirement funds. So it does matter how it's paid, what assets are available. A lot of the times, in the most simplest of cases, like if you're not talking about big investments, big, lots of pension stuff, and you're really just talking about the home, sure, it ends up being a split of the net sale proceeds, and you kind of just walk away.
Yeah.
That's usually, in the simplest of scenarios.
The simplest of scenarios is just that, sure.
But yeah, in the more complex scenarios, you can't just say, well, I owe you $500,000, so I'm giving you half of I'm going to transfer you $500,000 of my pension. Meanwhile, I have $300,000 sitting in a TFSA. Well, that spouse is for sure going to say, wait a minute, you've got liquid funds available. Why should I wait till I retire 20 years from now to access that equalization payment? Because
something that's important is that if we're equalizing a pension, there's something called a pension rollover. You can roll over a pension on a tax-free basis, but it has to go into then a retirement account.
Or an existing pension.
And then, as some of you might know, when you start withdrawing from RSPs or a pension, there's income tax to that. So the equalization process, in a general sense, we explained it, but there are tax consequences to that as well. There can be tax consequences on many of the assets you own, whether it be foreign investments or also just you're on RSP. If you have an income deriving property as well, like you own a rental property, there's tax consequences to that as well. So there's a lot of different aspects of the equalization payment that you have to sort of take into account prior to just sort of paying something out.
And you really need, what we tell people here, you need a lawyer and an accountant a lot of the times, because the accountant really guides the process of the calculations that we then use, especially if there's self-employment income and businesses involved. So
yeah,
it does get complex, which is why we always say, and we have always said on this show, call a lawyer, get independent legal advice. Doesn't have to be us, could be us,
should be us.
But do that, because sometimes it's you'll get way over your head and be drowning. And on top of the stresses of actually just the separation, to then try to figure out all this financial stuff is actually kind of a nightmare. So, you know, find a lawyer. We have a job for a reason. We do it. We help you take that, at least that one stressor off. You know, the emotional burden is still there, but my little plug for lawyers, you know, solidarity, you know, call us because we can help.
Yeah, that's what we're there for.
So why don't, I think we'll take a break and we'll wrap up.
And we're back. So we spoke about a lot of the divorce process, but now how do we get to the resolution, right? So there's a few things. So what's the first step?
So typically what we would recommend is a separation agreement or that's the most, I guess, amicable or less invasive type of negotiation.
Yeah.
You know, we try to encourage parties to have a negotiation session together, you know, 2 lawyers, 2 parties in our office, try to hammer out, you know, parenting plans and money issues and all of that stuff in a separation agreement, because those documents, number one, once they're signed, they're just as good as a court order because they can be enforced.
Well, it's a contract.
It's a contract. Yeah. It's a marriage contract. It's protected. And so if you can do that, that's amazing. That's what you want. That's where you want to be. And those documents are living documents. They're, you know, you can continue to add to them and change them in writing as you go on. So,
and you get control over the process, which is very nice.
You don't have a stranger, aka a judge, making a decision about your life, not knowing who you are, not knowing who your kids are, not knowing anything about you. So that's great. And it avoids the court process of all the mudslinging and all of the affidavits that go back and forth. So we try to recommend negotiating a separation agreement. If you can't get there, sometimes there's family mediation.
Yeah, mediation. So if you need help sort of guiding you through the negotiation, you can hire a mediator, and they can, at that point, your positions and your motives can be discussed, and then we can it's a guided negotiation. I think is the best way to.
You know, we saw it in episode 1 of this season. Scott Crotto does mediation work.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a type of, you know, you watch that episode to find out what mediation's all about, because it's a without prejudice discussion, safe environment.
Yeah.
You know, anything you say during that session is not to be used against you.
Which is solid.
Very, very beneficial, very great. There's roster mediators, as we found out from Scott, and there's also private mediators. So, you know, watch the episode if you're thinking about that, and pursue that process if you think that's what's best for you. Less used is arbitration. Don't see that very often.
Don't see it very often. We've not done it a ton, but if you have like a single issue, you've dealt with everything, but there's a single issue that you're just not agreed to, you can decide to arbitrate that issue. So it is kind of like the court process, just not with a judge. And you can get a decision that can then be turned into a court order. Yeah,
and then appealed to a court if necessary. So there is those processes of safety nets in the arbitration agreements and the Arbitration Act. And then your last resort is just good old litigation.
A court application. And that's when, you know, we're disagreeing on most things. And in that case, then we have to go through the family law process of an application. There's specific rules. The family law rules are specific pieces of legislation. So that's why getting independent legal advice might be your first stop when even considering a divorce, because if you want to just jump into court right away, there's specific rules, a specific process that you might need to know first and foremost.
And I think what it would be amiss of us, I think, to not just explain a little bit about the timelines in court, because we encourage ADR so much, because right now and today, as of January 20th, you know, if I want to bring an application in the family court right now, your first court date's like April or May. So you think that your issues are pressing and they're very important to you. It's all you're thinking about. But having to wait 4 months for a first court date to then set another date, which is like another 4 months down the line. It's 8 months before you sit down in front of a judge to even talk about an issue.
Yeah.
Imagine. So ADR as we talked about in episode 1 of the season, mediation, negotiation, try it before you think about commencing an application, because the timelines today are just atrocious.
It behooves you. It behooves you to really consider ADR first and foremost. Like you said, because in certain courts we're waiting over 4 months, and like you said, the issues are more pressing than that.
Yeah.
So if you can figure it out without the need of a judge, that's your best bet.
I always say to my clients, wouldn't you rather control the narrative
Big time.
than have somebody control it for you?
Yeah.
Right? So think about that. We'll leave you with that. We've talked a lot about, not exciting things, but it's real life.
It's divorce. It's the like I think you had said it earlier. It's sometimes the hardest part of it's the most difficult time of someone's life.
Yeah.
And it's not easy.
No.
And hopefully we can, there's different, I always say this, there's just different avenues of divorce. We deal in the legal sense, but, and we're not therapists, but we have to listen, and we support, but again, like we're not therapists. We deal in the legal avenue, but there's so many different facets of a divorce. So it's difficult, it's complex, and it's emotionally draining, and hopefully we can make it less so.
Yeah. And that takes us to the end of episode 4. I surely hope that it's not another 4 months before I
don't think so.
Find myself in this chair again.
Yeah.
So we're hopeful that we're back on normal schedule. Every couple of weeks you'll see us, hopefully. And, stay tuned. Actually, over the little break, we were giving away Sudbury Wolves tickets to lucky winners on our Instagram account. So don't forget to refollow us. You probably didn't, you took us off your Instagram, but you should probably go do that again. YouTube, we like the subscribers. The subscriber count seems to be stable or declining, so help that a little bit. We're on Apple now, we're on Spotify. Go give us a follow there. We love to see it. We track the statistics and like to see that you guys are listening and watching to us. It's been a blast. I'm excited to be doing this again. Hopefully we can continue the momentum. And that wraps us up for episode 4. So I'm Darren Chohan.
I'm Matt Butler. See you next time.